Portland, Hawaii. I mean,
Hello, everybody. Good evening.
For a little while.
Well,
yeah.
I would only do
Welcome.
much to the chagrin
I'm
of
Karen
our
Tucker,
publishers.
CEO of the Churchill Club, and our program tonight is called Silicon Valley's Secret Sauce. We're very privileged to have with us 5 amazing individuals here to speak with us tonight and share their insights. Starting on the end, down there, we have Bill Coleman, Sandra Kurtzig, Deborah Perry Piscione, Paul Wiefels, and our moderator, Michael Malone. Thank you all very much for being here tonight. I'd also like to extend a big thank you to Silicon Valley Bank for opening their doors to us this evening, for their partnership and their generosity in making this program possible. Also want to thank Andy Dickerson for videotaping for us tonight, and especially thank and congratulate Debra for writing her terrific new book, which came out today, called Secrets of Silicon Valley. Deborah's book is the reason for the timing of the program tonight, and copies have been contributed for all of you by Silicon Valley Bank.
That's nice.
Everybody in the audience tonight. A brief introduction for those of you in the audience who are less familiar with Churchill Club. The club is Silicon Valley's premier independent business and technology forum. Since 1985, we have been convening unique Silicon Valley conversations where people can connect with ideas and with each other. And we are a member-supported nonprofit organization, and we welcome you to join us, should you be so interested. We have an outstanding set of programs coming up over the next 2 months. I think there are 12 in all, including tonight, including cloud computing strategies for the top line on April 9, the Great Silicon Valley Oxford Union Debate on April 11, Colin Mayer and Kim Palazzi talking about how to retool the corporation for greater impact on April 12, the future of work with Aaron Levy and Tony Zingali, the CEOs of Box and Jive, respectively, and Peter Levine from Andreessen Horowitz on April 25th. Shell Oil Company, Marvin Odom on May 1. ARM President, soon-to-be CEO Simon Segars on May 9. And the 15th annual Top 10 Tech Trends on May 23rd. And these are just some of the programs coming up. So be sure to get on the mailing list or just keep an eye on the website as the new programs get posted. If you're tweeting, please use the hashtag Churchill Club, and you'll find other Twitter codes in your printed program. Our moderator, Mike Malone, has had a most impressive career. I'm quite sure he's known to each and every one of us in the room. Having covered Silicon Valley and tech for more than 25 years, he has written for many great publications, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes ASAP, the New York Times, Economist, Fortune, and he started out at the San Jose Mercury News as the nation's first daily tech reporter, where he was twice nominated for a Pulitzer Prize for investigative reporting. He has authored or co-authored a dozen award-winning books. He has a new one coming out next month, which is a novel, and he's also working on a book about Intel. He has hosted 3 nationally syndicated public television interview series. He's co-produced an Emmy-nominated PBS miniseries called The New Heroes about social entrepreneurs. And with everything he has going on, including his teaching and his mentorship of others, I am pretty sure that he doesn't ever sleep. But one thing is for certain, there is no one on earth better to lead this discussion tonight. Please give your warmest welcome to Mike Malone.
Yay!
Wow, thank you. That was quite an introduction. Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. It's always marvelous to see Silicon Valley assemblages. It's such an amazing group of people we have in this community, and every time we get together, it's almost like a Renaissance gathering. Tonight we're going to talk about Silicon Valley's secret sauce, and we're going to look at the magic of Silicon Valley, of which we all contribute and all participate, and hopefully we're all rewarded from. The questions tonight are, what can other regions learn from the innovative capital of this community? What can they emulate about us? Not the traffic. What should they avoid? And what makes Silicon Valley so special? Our panelists tonight are Bill Coleman, CEO and Chairman of Resilient Networks and a partner of Alsop Louie Partners. Valley legend, Sandra Kurtzig, CEO of Kenandy, one of the Silicon Valley's, and she was one of the Silicon Valley's first female chief executives. We met on your first week in Silicon Valley as the founder of Ask Computer, and she was the first woman to take a technology company public in the Valley. Deborah Perry Piscione is an entrepreneur and author of The Secrets of Silicon Valley, What Everyone Else Can Learn from the Innovation Capital of the World. Great jacket quotes. I'm a connoisseur of jacket quotes because I have to go out and get them for my book, and she did real well on this one. And Paul Wiefels, co-founder with Geoffrey Moore and managing partner of the Chasm Group. So you guys ready? We're going to go fast.
I think so.
Brace yourselves. Let's start by looking at the Valley right now. While the rest of the country is still struggling after 4 years of recession and malaise, and even California as a state has barely escaped bankruptcy in recent years, Silicon Valley's booming. All of you that came down here tonight on 101, it's starting to look like 1998 all over again. The coffers of the VCs are filled with money, not necessarily with open doors, but filled with money. Thousands of new companies are getting started, and even the real estate values, amazingly enough, have come back to 1990s levels. So what the hell is going on here? Why are we this oasis of prosperity in the midst of all these troubles? Traditionally, eventually, the rest of the world would drag the Valley down. Now we're contracyclical. Why?
I'm happy to take that question.
Go.
So I actually, excuse me, got this book contract as an outsider. I think part of understanding the success is being an outsider and coming from a place such as Washington, D.C., where you're indoctrinated into this culture where everything's closed, everything's hierarchical, there's bureaucracy. There's a famous saying in Washington, be careful on your way up because you never know who you're going to meet on your way down. And we very haphazardly, I have to admit, due to my husband's job change, moved to California. We could come anywhere, and we just happen to have some relatives here. So we thought, oh, this would be a great place. I had never been to Silicon Valley before. I had been to San Francisco many times. And I went from this transition of people asking me in Washington, D.C., who do you work for? I mean, you were judged and based on that pyramid and that hierarchy based on who you work for, who you were aligned with, which side of the aisle you were with. And I went through that process to people continuously asking me, when I first moved here, how can I help you? And people I barely knew would invite me out to lunch, sit down, open up their Rolodexes, and then within weeks, literally, of being here, I was now sitting down with some of the most prominent venture capitalists and entrepreneurs. And I think that in itself speaks for itself when you go from such a closed environment to such an open, trusting environment, and you see this enormous dichotomy that really got my wheels spinning in terms of why does this place operate like this? Because I had never experienced it before.
Well, I've been through the cycles of innovation here since 1971. And I'll tell you, they never change. They get more and more exciting every time. But we have them about every 10 years. Many of you have lived through it, and you see it. It's boom and bust, and it's amazing. What it's about is disruptive innovation. It's an innovation that is going to commoditize basically what it's replacing. That's what silicon did. That's what the PCs and the computers did. That's what the internet did and is doing. But when you go back, the biggest one we had was the 90s. And it was crazy, right? But it was about there's always about two things. One is the build out of the network, which was creating lots of value in big companies like Cisco's, et cetera. And the other was the invention of the internet. And that was all hype and eyeballs. But so we had a crash afterwards. Well, we have two going on right now, but I call these mega trends. One is the cloud. Now, the cloud is basically ultimately a utility that totally commoditizes everything having to do with IT and communications. All the service companies, all the providers, all the IT companies, period. And it turns into something that creates more value than you've ever seen before. Add to it now, we extend out to what Cisco calls the Internet of Everything or the Network of Things. You got mobile going on. The value proposition being created there are amazing. And the companies in the South Bay that are being formed, there are more companies formed in the last few years in the South Bay than any period of that time at all. But the other one that's going on is we have all the social stuff, right? We used to call it Web 2.0. Well, social is great. It's connecting everybody and everything to do things. But what's happening now, what all the venture investment in now is, how do you monetize that beyond advertising? And there have been more companies created in San Francisco in the last 2 years than in Silicon Valley. So Silicon Valley now is not just Silicon Valley, it's huge. Well, those two things together, I believe, will create the biggest creation of value in the history of the world, and that's going to happen in the second half of this decade. Think about what we're talking about, monetizing real-time connections. Everything about the advancement of humanity is about increasing productivity, and that's really based on the quantity and quality of communication and the speed of knowledge creation. Now we're doing this on steroids, and this decade, these two things are going to come together. That's what's happened in Silicon Valley. We're the center of it.
Okay, I'll buy the creation of new companies, the creation of wealth, not if we can't go public, not if Sarbanes-Oxley is sitting out there.
Value.
And all the of value, okay.
Which,
So we're going to make the Oracles and the Ciscos of the world rich by buying us up, and we're going to get the payoffs.
no, we're going to make, we're going to take, so Sloan did a study of the advancement of mankind, and for the 400 years that created the Industrial Revolution, we increased productivity by about 100%. Their prediction is in this century we'll increase it by 1,000%. So we'll take the middle class to not the top 5% of the world, but the top 95% of the world. That's creation of value. I didn't say wealth, I said value.
Paul, you and I grew up in this town.
Yes, we did.
I picked cherries, you cut apricots.
Yes, we did.
So why are we doing so well right now?
People like what we do.
Okay.
They like cherries, they like apricots, they like silicon, they like software, they like networks, they like all the stuff that Bill talks about, and they can't get enough of it. There's an irresistible, almost unquenchable urge, desire to get this kind of stuff. And I agree with Bill. We call it a little different Chasm Group. We talk about systems of record versus systems of engagement. Systems of record are the stuff that Oracle makes and SAP makes and to a certain extent IBM makes. All of that stuff is done. Right? That's been done. That's been laid down in the 90s. It was laid down last, you're either a red one or you're a blue and gray one or you're a real light blue one or you're kind of a Microsoft-y sort of one. It's the systems of engagement, all the things that has to connect into that, that's what we don't have. That's what people want. That's why they're coming to us and saying, the cloud makes this all happen. All the mobile stuff makes this all happen. Some of the social stuff, frankly, I think is real lame. But hey, all I need is one more bubble.
Yep.
So
Yeah, everybody badmouths bubbles.
exactly.
I
Well,
love
I got
bubbles.
3 more years to get my last kid through college, so a bubble would be just fine. But you cannot deny what's going on with these systems of engagement versus systems of record. Engagement is the next big 10-year secular event in Silicon Valley, and we'll lead it. And that's what people want. And that's why we're all busy.
Okay, Sandy, you have this unique talent of starting companies in the worst possible times, right? The 70s are sort of like the Sargasso Sea of startups. Nothing really, besides Apple, nothing came out of the 70s. But you start ask and make it work. Mm-hmm. Now here we are in a terrible time again, and you've got your company. Why?
Well, first of all, the best time to start a company is when the market's down. When the market's up, everybody can start one. And I think that one of the things in Silicon Valley, obviously Bill mentioned the destructive technologies that come and go, and there's been a number of them. I started Ask, the first company I started with the disruptive technology of going from a mainframe to a mini computer, and we were the first ones to develop manufacturing and financial software on the mini computer. And this time, there's been mini computers have sort of ridden a wave going from mini computers to client server, which is just mini computers that are smaller and more powerful. And now we have this destructive technology of the cloud that you mentioned. And that means that all software is going to be rewritten on the cloud because it's a better economic model. So there's going to be a lot of startup companies that are going to develop software on the cloud. We happen to be the first one and probably looking at some good success here on building the whole ERP system on the cloud from order to cash. And, but everybody, I think entrepreneurship is really a common denominator of what goes on in the Valley. And, an entrepreneur is someone who starts a company and takes the risk of starting it. And you can do it in so many different ways. And I think that the Valley allows people to be entrepreneurs in very, very different ways. When I started Ask, my whole idea was to have a part-time job that I can do in the second bedroom and have a child, and have children, 2 children, but I had 2 boys. And that's all I wanted was a part-time job. The fact that the company grew to be a public company and $700 million in sales and so forth was was a nice little fall out of that. But I see my 2 sons are both entrepreneurs, and they've started totally different companies. Andy, my oldest son, is the founder and CEO of Just Answer. They just changed their name to Pearl.com, and it's a question and answer company that is taking over, is trying to do in the service area what Amazon has done in the retail area. And they're doing a little over $100 million in sales. And he started from zero, has raised 2 rounds of money. With Ask, by the way, I didn't have any venture capital, went from $2,000 to public. Andy started Just Answer, Pearl.com, and he raised 2 rounds of money, $60 million of money so far to date. My other son decided he wants to be an entrepreneur, but he wants a lifestyle entrepreneurship company. He wants to be able to not work till midnight every night like his brother and I do, but he wants to be able to go home and have dinner with his family. He wants to have hobbies, sail, and have woodworking and gardening and so forth. And so he has a company that he's started. It's called I Reuse, which is an environmental consulting company that's doing and Ken, my youngest son, is making more money than Andy and I put together. But that's, not
Sandy,
counting our stock.
is Andy the child that was in the playpen while you were sitting at the kitchen table?
Yes.
Writing
Mike
software?
and I have known each other we're not going to say how long we've known each other, but I have to tell a little story. Mike wrote our first press release for Ask when he was at Hewlett Packard, and then I rewrote it.
Yeah, completely. Debra, we're going to try something tonight.
Okay.
Kind of a motif running through this conversation. You've written a book called The Secrets of Silicon Valley. So every couple of minutes I'm going to turn to you and ask you to give us another secret of Silicon Valley.
Okay,
Okay?
absolutely.
Then they don't have to read your book, but they've already gotten it. So
Oh, no, I want them to read the book.
All right, let's start. First secret.
So this dovetails, I think, nicely in terms of what Sandy just said is, and I feel like I'm cheating a little bit because I've been talking on the Washington Post this week about this, but again, I'll refer to the 18 years I spent in Washington, D.C. The similarity between Washington and Silicon Valley is it's full of type A personalities. But the similarities end there. The difference is in Washington and places, other spheres of influence like New York, everybody's striving. If you're a highly educated person, there's a vast probability that you're striving for greed, power, money, all those things that make many of these East Coast cities tick. In Silicon Valley, conversely, you're allowed to be an entrepreneur or not. And there are those enormously successful stories. Clearly, from the female perspective, Sheryl Sandberg, Marissa Mayer, who had no intention of ever starting a company, but very much, purported to stratospheric levels, just being management and operational. And I think there's a big distinction there. So I like to say one of the secrets is really, no matter who you are, whether you're a venture capitalist, you're an entrepreneur, you're in management, I think everybody thinks of themselves as a startup. And it is that disruptive notion, for many people who come from the East Coast, it is this disdain from where you came from, and doing it more in this West Coast Silicon Valley fashion. And I think there's a very important distinction there.
Now, you guys remember Annalise Saxenian years ago wrote a famous book, very influential, where she claimed that the key to Silicon Valley's success was cooperation. And I remember reading at the time and watching the semiconductor guys just beating the hell out of each other and thinking, I don't see a lot of cooperation here. And yet, over time, I've kind of come to believe it. Where do you come down on this? Is it really cooperation, or is it the cutthroat competition?
Well, first of all, if you want to meet, I can introduce you to people that are very interested around here in greed, power, and money. So you may just not have met them all yet. As Bill
running in the
and, Bill
wrong
and Sandy
crowd.
Bill and Sandy can introduce you to people like that too. Sorry.
I used to do investigative stories on them.
Yeah.
On the
They,
East
they
Coast.
hide.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
undercover, actually. They drive
You haven't been here long enough.
Tesla S's. Okay. What was the question? It was how
Cooperation or competition?
Well, it's both. It's both, and the fancy term, I suppose, is coopetition. But so way back when, actually before Sandy bought Ingress, I was head of product marketing for Ingress. And when Ingress was a small company, pre-public, there was Oracle, there was Ingress, there was Sybase, and there was Informix. And there was kind of the four sisters of, loosely speaking, of the Bay Area, two on the East Bay, two on the, here on the peninsula. And the bad guy, particularly in Larry Ellison's eyes, was IBM. So we would get on these daises like this, and the representatives from each company, and they'd be going on about how great the relational database is and how lame, Culinet is, and companies that most of you had never heard of before. And then, what a horrible thing IBM was because it was a lock-in and everything else. Soon as we started to get traction, that is, any of the four of us, and Oracle was out ahead, soon that was all off. Okay. Then it became, well, they have page level locking and we have row level locking, and that's therefore much, much better, right? And so all of that, then it became competition, and that's kind of the way it goes. I haven't seen a category yet, and we've been in the Valley where we've been working with clients since '93. I've never seen a category yet, Michael, that doesn't play that game at some point.
Yeah, I think that's kind of interesting, and of course Ellison is the master of that.
Yeah.
He gave a talk recently, and I was in the audience, and he just went right after Ingress. I mean, Ingress has been gone for how many years?
Oh, I know.
He decided that, no one else in the audience even knew who Ingress was.
Yeah, it was the difference between making shitty software and good software, and he presented.
He says, he brought in all these people from MIT, and I'm saying, excuse me, this is ninth, whatever year this is, So I'm just waiting to see how he handles Kenandy. It's going to be very interesting. By the way, Kenandy is the pronunciation of the name, and Ken and Andy are my sons, so that's how the company got formed. So, but yeah, I think it's be interesting because he's not particularly popular with women, so it'll be interesting to see how he handles our competition.
Well, let's segue off of Larry a little bit here. I've had a few run-ins with him. One of the interesting. Last week, they came out with not very good numbers, and it was a reminder that if you look at any decade in Silicon Valley history and look at the largest and most successful companies, and then you look at the next decade, the list is usually 80% or 90% changed. Mm-hmm. That going into this decade, HP strong, Apple doing unbelievably well, historically well, Oracle buying up everything in sight, spending billions of dollars, and now they're all seeming to stumble in one way or another. Meanwhile, Cisco, which was in serious straits 3-4 years ago, back on its feet and roaring along. Mm-hmm. So care to make any guesses on who doesn't make it through this decade?
Oh, I think that Oracle is a very good company, and they're a bank now. I mean,
but they've got to go to the cloud, and they're not doing it very well.
I think it's very difficult to make the transition to the cloud. I think that if you see how well Salesforce has done, and Mark Benioff, I think, is pretty much the master of the cloud and deserves to be. I think he's had a brilliant strategy and a brilliant company, and he's probably the person I respect the most in business, in software right now. But I mean, he is focused on just the cloud. And it's very hard to do both the cloud and do legacy software and on-premise software and on-demand software and whatever the name is. I think you really have to focus. I think that the cloud is a whole different selling model. It's a whole different pricing model. And I certainly give Larry a lot of credit. I think he's a brilliant businessman. And I think that, but he's a bank right now. So I'm not sure whether he wants to give up that bank valuation and be as entrepreneurial as he once was. It'll be interesting to see.
Well, this valley has thrived and been the world's master in creative destruction. We thrive because of creative destruction, and it's it's ultimately what happens. That means the lifespan of our companies are shorter, the cycles are higher, and we live on basically our latest ability to master whatever the creative destruction is. And so if we take taking Sandy's point, the cloud is basically, I've said for this whole decade, I mean, for a decade, that in the next 20 years, any technology company over $5 to $10 billion in sales is at risk, because the disruption that the cloud will bring to technologies companies is so massive, it's beyond belief. You either have to own a franchise that is already commoditized and you are the commoditized leader in it.
Which is what he is.
Which is, well, okay. So let's look at the generations of what's going to happen. The biggest company the bigger you are, the harder you fall. The biggest company that's in danger right now is Hewlett-Packard.
Yeah.
They have no value proposition
To the
that I
point
can.
3 weeks ago, they were on the brink of being broken up. I mean, the oldest company in the valley, the most famous company in the valley, and the largest company in the valley.
The companies that have the biggest opportunity to fail or succeed are the ones that own the biggest franchise in the building blocks. So in my opinion, those are Western Digital and Seagate at the lowest end. They're Intel in the middle. They're Cisco in the hardware world. They own enough of a franchise that they're at least franchise players in their marketplace in parts that are already commoditized and will be commoditized more. They can choose to move up and down and maintain that, or they can let someone else do it to them. But the key, I think, to this valley has been it's like a big keiretsu. It's like a big guild where people are constantly moving because the companies are constantly changing and the technologies are constantly changing. There's cooperation across all of them in their self-interest. I mean, in my days at BEA, we worked very closely with Sun and Oracle and IBM and Microsoft to create Java. Well, it wasn't Microsoft until the very end, and then they decided they'd be a friend. But meanwhile, we competed like crazy on other things, and it's just the valley is a crucible of creative destruction.
I think that in the commoditized companies, though, they combine. So in the end, you have to have disk drives. So 10, 15 years ago, there were 70 disk drive companies. Now there are 3. Western Digital, Seagate, and one other more minor company.
Toshiba owns 10%, the other two own 40
right.
some.
So, I mean, I think what's happened is they combine 70 down to 3. So the same thing happens in other areas. So you do, you either be bought or you buy companies or you get bought.
One of the strange phenomena I've noted about the valley that seems to be unique to our culture. Back when David and I wrote The Virtual Corporation, we were talking about, everybody goes home, and works from, the companies just disappear, the walls go away, and they become these evanescent virtual corporations. And then I realized, I started looking at my own resume and the resume of other people I knew who had been in this town for 20 years. And all of us have like 30 companies on our resume, all of them dead. And I thought, I remember you talked to your grandfather, and he I put in 43 years at Ford, I put on quarter panels on F-150 pickup trucks, and he had the same job for the whole 50 years. None of us have a job more than 50 months, and there's no iconic companies anymore. I mean, the keepers of Moore's Law, Intel, is in trouble. Do we come out of this decade utterly transformed that you won't even recognize the valley by the time we're done with all this?
No, but I think this is the beauty of the valley. I like to say that it's like a big trampoline, and there's nothing stable about the valley, nor is it designed to be that way. I mean, it's this constant
Don't
jumping.
human beings like a certain amount of stability?
No, not everybody. I mean, I think I just did something with TechCrunch yesterday, and that was a point. Again, not everybody needs to be an entrepreneur. Sometimes you're investing in somebody else's ideas, just like venture capitalists do as well. And when you look at, I worked with Doug Henton very closely, who's an economist at Collaborative Economics, just to try to figure out if I could prove that Silicon Valley is immune from the economic indicators, what was going on after 2008. And we couldn't quite get there because there was definitely a downturn in the fourth quarter.
Oh, yeah. Were you here in 2008?
Yeah, I was. But if
Yeah.
you know what the rest of the country, if not the rest of the world, was experiencing, I mean, we still own a lot of real estate back in the East Coast. I mean, it was, damaging. I mean, to the point, I mean, what Silicon Valley experienced, it is not emblematic of what was going on in the rest of the country. But that's the point. When you look at how many, I forget what the number is, but I have it in the book, how many Fortune 500 companies are actually based here, it's less than 10. So you would think about, with all of its success, and you would try to find some sort of correlation, you would naturally assume there's a lot of Fortune 500s here, but there's not.
What do you guys think of Marissa's announcement? Everybody at Yahoo, come home. All outs and free. No more sitting at Starbucks or Pete's and working. There was a survey like 4 years ago that HP and Intel, 40% of their employees had never actually met their boss in person. So that virtuality had come a long ways. Now all of a sudden, we have this company saying everybody has to go to the office again. Back to the coffee machine in the corner and et cetera. What do you guys think? Is that a trend for the future?
I think Yahoo needs to come back together at this point and figure out what it's going to be. And so there's value in having people together. I don't know that company intimately by any means, but just in terms of the market share, what it's lost over the next, over the last couple of years or the last decade, they're at a point where people really need to join together and collaborate and share ideas and figure out what it's going to be moving forward.
You guys agree with that? I mean, the vision was we were all going to have home television. You would have Cisco, team meeting online systems, and we wouldn't need to have an office, and buildings were going to downsize, and everyone's going to get scattered around the planet.
I agree with it. I mean, Yahoo has not created any shareholder value in a long, long time.
A long, long time.
And that is one of its prime missions. Regardless of how they do that, they need to do it. And so the idea that everybody's running a big nursery school is great when your stock price is at $800 and you get free food and everything else. But when it's not, and when you're not making any money for your investors, and when your customers are saying, what the hell are you? Then all of a sudden a culture moves from one of, soft, feely, touchy collaboration to culture to what we would traditionally call command and control.
Get rid of the Pilates balls and lava lamps
that's,
and back to work.
that shift to a command and control culture, I think, is something that, personal observation is necessary, and that company needs an identity.
Do you think Yahoo employees will put up with it? I mean, you've been working at home for a while. You've created this new kind of work reality for yourself, and now all of a sudden you got to get in the car at 7:30 in the morning and drive down Matilda in the traffic and go to your little cubicle. I mean, are people going to do that again? I'm not convinced.
Well, I think first of all, I think Yahoo is a unique situation where Marisa had to do something.
Yeah,
a
but the
lot
East
of
Coast
people,
media loved it. I mean, this was splattered
well,
all
that's
over
right.
the
I think
news.
she got sort of a little hacked on that one because she has this nursery evidently next to her own office. But I
In
think
her office.
or in her office, okay. But I think that she had no choice personally. But I think working at home is difficult. I mean, HP had this thing managed by walking around. Remember that, Mike?
Vividly.
And you walked around, you see what was happening, and that form of communication was very, very important to developing this wonderful culture at Hewlett Packard in the beginning days when Hewlett and Packard were there. And I think clearly that's something that we did at Ask and do at Kenandy, is walk around. And I think that if you don't have people in the office, it's hard to walk around and see what's going on. Okay,
Well,
So I think that it's a difficult situation. I think some working at home is good, but I really do think that you need to have people together. You need to have community. You need to have some interaction.
So I'm the extremist on this because I just don't believe in most cases this virtual corporation really works. I just don't think it works, this work from home thing. Piece part work, individual work that can be measured like that, possibly. But when you're talking about things that involve creativity, innovation, teamwork, it's about the collective. And it's about in two dimensions. The first dimension is you gain off each other. right? You're working as a team. But the other dimension is this is a guild. A guild means you learn from people. The reason China can't become Silicon Valley, no matter how much money they put in it in the next 30 to 40 years, is they haven't got the people to learn from. Why do you think that almost all major operating system and system software work is done on the West Coast of the United States, nowhere else in the world successfully on a major? It's because it's been done here. You learn from. I asked the guy who's the head of my software development when I worked at Sun. I was the head of software development there. He was the chief architect of all of Solaris when we did it back in the 80s. He was the chief architect of Sun One, and I asked him, what's the difference between the best software engineers and the best software architects? Is it 10 to 1? He said 100,000. It's not even in the same. And you don't learn that just by getting your bachelor's degree in computer science and think you can do everything.
Okay, let's find out. How many of you right now work at home most of the time? All the rest of you go to an office. How many of you, who keep your hands up, of work at home, how many of you would quit your job if they made you go to the office 5 days a week now?
Oh, am I the only one?
No.
Oh, no.
So how many of you that work at home
I would.
work with a team
He works for
that
himself,
that
yeah.
it's the team that's building the product or service? 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Depends for us.
So most people are independent, are working for themselves, is what you're saying. Yeah.
I think it depends on what you want and what you're trying to achieve. When I first moved here, I started interviewing at Google and begrudgingly did not get a job, but I had to go through that process of, I went through 7 interviews, ended up not getting the job, but I went through that process of, is this really what I want to do? Do I want to sacrifice? I have young children. I actually, like Sandy, I wanted to be around my children. So I opted to build a company, as did my co-founder, where we could work from home. We opened up an office in New York, and we made our employees in New York go to the office because that's how they're accustomed to. But I think one of the things I've always admired about management here, and again, this is not a broad brush, is recognizing, debunking this old industrial style of people sitting in cubicles from 8 to 6, and allowing people to have some degree of freedom. Not every company. But many companies in Silicon Valley figuring out ways in which people work best, because not everybody does their most creative work during 8 to 6 or 9 to 5. Some do it very late at night. I'm a morning person. And so, it is, I think, a partnership that can be achieved here between manager and employee to try to figure out what's your best
I remember
time.
meeting with Eric Schmidt the first few weeks he was at Google, and we met at a ping pong table, with the Pilates balls and everything else, and he was trying so hard to be hip. He kind of looked like your divorced uncle, on his first date. He kind of had a dress shirt, but he had unbuttoned 2 buttons, and he was just trying, and he was surrounded by these children, and he just looked so completely out of place. I mean, it was a long ways from Sun. I mean.
A couple of things, though. The first is, I don't believe it's a 9 to 5. Now, I've always been.
Not in this town.
No, I've always been. You want to have core hours that where the teams can be together, whether that's 10 to 2 or whatever. Some will come in early, some will come in later, whatever. But the other thing is, you can also have work home a day or 2 a week. But the team, if you're in this kind of creative environment, the teams have to work together. Now, if you've been the environment in startups has really changed in the last 10 years. If you go into startups, especially San Francisco, you'll find rooms like this, filled with tables that look like they're 20 feet long and 4 feet wide with 14 people around it. And there's just a buzz going on all the time. They're just creating. And they can't do that if they're not together. I mean, it's just the energy level is through the roof.
Let me try another poll about Silicon Valley culture. How many of you in the last 6 months have gone to the office on Sunday morning? Oh, man. How many of you have conducted a business phone conference from your kids' Little League or AYSO soccer game? Yeah.
How about from the gondola?
Welcome to Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
I,
Go ahead.
No, sorry, I hate working at home. But my partners don't. So we go to the office, but we go to the office when we have to work a case together. And so what I did was I found myself going to the office every day, creature of habit that I am, and nobody was showing up. So what do I need to do this for? I feel ridiculous. So, but I get a lot more done in our office than I get at home. And when I bring a case team together, we're still sitting there in the at the whiteboard, and we got paper strewn out all over the conference room table, and we're working a client's case, and you cannot do that from home, to Bill's point.
Deborah, give me another secret.
Let's see. And that was my big fear with this title and I had absolutely no say in this whatsoever. The publisher, that people were going to think there was something insidious here. That there was, that there was actual secrets. It's secrets to anybody outside of Silicon Valley. In fact, when Karen Tucker, the CEO of the Churchill Club, asked me to speak here tonight, I said, well, what the heck am I going to say? These people already know everything. This is for everybody except people in Silicon Valley. If my good friend Vivek Wadhway was here, we battle a lot on particular issues, and he likes to focus on women and minorities, but more, I would say, of African Americans and Hispanics being discriminated against. If I don't want to put words in his mouth, but something I'm paraphrasing to a bit. And to me, it's a numbers game, and I think that's also something that I find incredibly revealing, is that there's a freedom that you can be a highly educated woman and opt out of the workforce. And I do constantly have people coming to me saying, where are the women? Find me the women. And mostly women, females who are engineers or computer scientists, and there's just a shortage overall. But I have found the Valley incredibly open, and in terms of the value in what you bring to the table, irrespective of your gender, your ethnic diversity, the color of your skin, or your age for that matter, is unparalleled to any place I've ever been. You took a big breath there.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that.
Well, a lot of it's due to Sandy, frankly. I mean, she's the person, she's the lady that made the template.
She is the first, yeah.
Regis McKenna famously said that everyone thinks the Silicon Valley is about success, but is actually about failure. And that it's as much about the death of companies as it is the creation of companies. Is that really true? I mean, is there such thing, have we learned how to learn from failure? And is there such thing as a good failure in Silicon Valley? I mean, I hear that phrase from VCs all the time, but do you buy it? No. Is there a good failure in the Valley?
Well, I think it's actually kind of a funny thing, is that sometimes VCs prefer people who have failed because the next time around they really have this will and the desire to succeed. And I think that's part of the Valley, is that you're rewarded for trying, for getting up and trying again. I would like to can I change the subject a little tiny bit? Because one of the things that bothers me a little bit, I have a love-hate with the internet. Okay? The internet, of course, is a tool that is amazing. I mean, you can do everything on it. But I find in management that there are too many of the young people starting companies that sit there and just look at their internet. They don't walk around and talk to people. And in managing company, you still have to be able to talk to people. And even at dinner time, they're sitting there with their iPhones and texting, and they don't get out and socialize as much as I think that we did when we were their age. And that sort of bothers me. I think this talking to your, one of the things that really bothered me when we started Kenandy is we did these webinars, and we did these go-to-meetings, and I'm sitting there talking to this computer terminal, and of course it's more efficient than getting out and going to somebody's office. But we very quickly found out that, especially when we're selling to large companies, that as nice as it is and as much money we were saving by not going out to Chicago and so forth, that it's not the same as being in a room with a customer and talking to them face to face. And that we were closing sales a lot faster when we were there, one-on-one. And the same thing with just picking up the phone and talking to somebody. I mean, you can go back and forth with an internet message so many times, but then, picking up the phone and saying, look, I'm here for you, whatever you need to say to a customer. And so I think that we're losing a little bit of the socialization that we all talk about by just talking to this computer screen.
Not exactly the 21st century we're expecting, is it?
Well, you know, it's,
On the failure side, I don't think there's a good failure or bad failure. I think that failure is celebrated because, one, you got to stand up and dust yourself off, but two, you learn infinitely more going through a failure than you ever learn when it's all up and to the right. I mean, and when I formed BEA, I specifically wanted to recruit 2 other founders, and I decided I wanted them to be the best at what they were doing, but have been an executive in a high-growth large company, an executive in a startup, and have been in one failed company. And the reason for that is I didn't want to have them have to learn what it's like to fail and what it means to them, because they're the ones that are going to have to pull you out of it. And you come into the office with a frown in the morning when things are going bad, and you're the CEO or the head of development, rumors fly everywhere. I mean, it's something you learn. And that's that. In the heyday of BEA, after BEA, when the bubble burst, I was doing an interview for someone, and they asked me, "So, what do you think about that? About what just happened?" I said, "Well, there's a lot of folks that learned a lot of lessons here, and in 10 years, we're going to have some really seasoned entrepreneurs forming new companies."
Yeah, during a bubble, everybody's a genius.
Yeah.
In this valley, 8 out of 10 startups are going to die, right? The turnover of companies, the number of companies that last 10 years is a tiny fraction of the number that actually get going and make it. So we're completely surrounded by failure. Is the acceptance of that kind of failure as part of our existence, is that the secret sauce of Silicon Valley? Because anywhere else, just about, if you fail,
You're done.
You're stigmatized forever. You're a loser. But frankly, I would trust somebody who had been in 10 startups that did pretty well but failed than I would trust somebody who had been at one job at a big company for a decade.
I'm actually a little bit concerned about the startups. I don't know the statistics, but I think there's probably 10 times more startups today than there were 10, 15 years ago. And that's because you can get a computer terminal and you can start, and you don't have to have a lot of money.
Yeah, less capital.
Less capital. When I started Ask, it was unusual. I started with $2,000 and built the company with no venture capital. I mean, today, anybody can start a company with $2,000. And I think the problem that I see, so many of these kids are starting companies out of school. I think working for a big company is really useful. Good or bad, if it's a good experience or a bad experience, you see something and you learn something about management that you don't see when you're right out of school with no experience. And second of all, I just think that these kids, starting companies, 3 or 4 getting together and starting a company, and what I see is they don't have a plan. They just think, oh, we'll go write some software, we'll do something. And if you have no plan, any road will take you there, okay? And I think that so many of them fail, not because of the failures that you're talking about, where they're really, a company is built, it's failed. They're failed because they had no chance of succeeding. They don't have a plan, they don't know where they're going, they didn't have money, et cetera. And I think that in 10, 15 years ago, you really, you could start a little bit without money, but then you really had to raise money. And if you had to raise money, you had to put a plan into place. You had to think it through. And today you don't have to do that. And I don't think they're learning a whole lot by the failures that they're in.
Yeah, we as a firm, and I'm probably more vociferous about this than maybe a few of my partners. I won't look at a startup company we get calls, come in and help us do strategy and everything else. The first thing I ask is, do you have real money? Meaning, do you have intelligent money, not friends, family, and fool money? And then the second of all is, the second issue, have you been tested in the crucible of the marketplace? And that's not a couple of sales, but a demonstrated track record of being able to sell something. There are so many dumb ideas that you see coming out of startups, and they're dumb ideas because they went into it being dumb, right? You can code your way out of these sorts of things, but a dumb idea is a dumb idea. And so working for a big company teaches you some discipline about that. People come to me and say, I want to be a marketing guy. Go sell something. Have you ever carried a bag? Have you ever carried a quota? How can you market products and services if you've never sold them? That just blows my mind. Imagine that. And all you have to do is go to Hewlett-Packard and you'll see that in action.
God, my first job was Hewlett-Packard with Bill and Dave. And every job I ever had after that sucked by comparison. Let me ask a question. How many of you out there, let's try this. How many of you are in a startup? Let's just say pre-IPO. Hands up. Okay. Put your hands down keep them up. If you haven't made it through, if you're still in your angel phase, put your hands down. Series A. Okay. Heading towards IPO. Yeah, if there are one. Acquisition, that's better.
Acquisition,
Okay,
maybe.
I'm just curious. How that the nature of being in a startup has changed. You know, for a couple of years there, I saw every Starbucks and Pete's in the South Bay was filled with these little groups of people around the tables, and they were all doing iPod applications and iPhone applications, and they were trying to get. They didn't need much capital to do it, and the Valley was hurting, so they couldn't get any money, and that was this kind of burst of entrepreneurship. They all disappeared because most of them didn't make it. What I'm hearing now is that angel money is available, but there's not a lot of it. So if you have your startup, you can get down the path a little ways. But the VCs are sitting out there, and they've retreated because they did so badly in 2000 that they've become conservative. So now, speaking of chasms, there's now a $500,000 to a $1 million chasm. If you're in a startup, you got to make that jump. You got to get the A out of angel, and it's the hardest thing to do in Silicon Valley right now. You guys agree with that? And how do you get around it?
Well, I'll tell you from a venture capital point of view, when
By the way, don't say traction, because that's become the new dirty word in this town for startups.
No, it's so, especially in software, it's so easy to get started, and there's so little capital, and you can get it from angels and whatever. By the time most companies that get an A round, they already have built a product and they already have customer.
Yeah.
I mean, so they've demonstrated something works and the customer is willing to pay money for it. The value proposition has begun to be, they may have no clue how to distribute it and how to grow it and, and what marketing's about, but they've gotten that far, and that's a huge difference.
But 10 years ago, you just had to have the product. Now they've raised the bar, and you have to have traction, which is
Yes.
you have to have N number of customers and proof that you can get N+1.
So in the previous argument, I'll say Darwin works, and I don't care if all these kids. I co-teach a course in winter on entrepreneurship at Stanford School of Engineering. We get to select our kids, so we can take 25, and we have about 200 apply, and you bring all these folks in from any level. And one of the things that becomes very clear is everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. And you usually get to that point about what makes you successful or not. And I tell them frankly, I see only two successful paths for entrepreneurs. One, the crazy kids in college who invent something or do something that's not monetizable. Nobody even knows it's monetizable, and somehow they get to the point that Darwin selects them to get funded, and they build it. And at that point, a real CEO's put in, and that's what happened. It happened at Apple, it happened, everywhere. It happened at Yahoo, it happened at Google, it happened at Facebook, somebody to train those people. The rest come from mid-level professionals like me when I started BEA, who have some business experience. They bring together a team and they do a plan. But Darwin works, in either dimension. Today, what's filling that gap is there's a lot more angel money, but you can't walk down a block, somebody has opened another incubator, and we'll give you $200,000 for the first 6 months, and bam, and help you get your product. And half of them teach them the wrong lessons. Like,
Yeah, but that's just moving the playpens from the corporations to the incubators. I mean, that's...
Well, my point was, I'm not sure that they're learning from that failure.
well,
That's
Darwin
the
will
thing.
work that too.
Yeah,
They'll
no.
fail enough times they'll have to go get a real job
probably
because they
true.
got to.
That's
Okay, guys, real quick, we're going to take some questions
home
pretty
anymore.
quickly. Let's do a kind of a lightning round real fast. Infrastructure. I remember when I was a Cub reporter, and everyone's saying, the Valley's getting crowded, it's just going to become too expensive and too impossible to commute, and the Valley's just not going to make it past 1975 or 1980. I have heard this now every 10 years. And things get worse. I mean, it's crowded, it's expensive, and yet the Valley keeps thriving. Are we doing this despite the infrastructure or because of the infrastructure? And is at some point we just choke ourselves to death? Does that happen or does it never happen?
Well, I think The Economist, I can't remember when it was, but it had this great article talking about the shortage of housing in Silicon Valley and blaming the entire economic crisis on the shortage of housing in Silicon Valley, because this is where the opportunity was. But for anybody who was at Silicon Valley Index a couple weeks ago, where they did their State of the State, and they tend to look at the infrastructure, believe it or not, things move here much more as behind the curve, I think, as the infrastructure is. I mean, you look at just transportation and trains and how many different trains there are in the area, whether they having one central metro like you do or subway system like you do in the East Coast. Things are, as bad as they seem here, they're even worse on the East Coast. And I think these population centers are just continue to grow and evolve. But there is going to have to be a lot of initiative put in. The problem in this area is, every 5 miles, if that, you have a new jurisdiction.
Right.
So you have new, tax revenues, but also tax barriers as well, and so, or revenue generators, and then pressure put on these systems as well. So that's a big challenge here.
Next quick question. Is there, in this secret sauce, is there a potentially fatal ingredient in there? Is there anything that stops us in the next decade or 2 or 3? I mean, I can think of one. Moore's Law stops. That could conceivably stop this valley. You don't think so?
No.
No, I don't either.
No, I don't think so, because, you're writing a book about them. Ask them about what the next implementation is beyond silicon.
Oh, I'm not talking just about silicon, just the
Yeah.
fact that Moore's Law, the pace of
Yeah,
it,
but
if it continues, we continue to be the valley. If it slows, we stop.
Yeah, physics
having
gets
the
reinvented, Mike.
Well, that's true.
Physics gets reinvented, and they're one of the guys that are doing it.
How about the creation of another Silicon Valley out there somewhere in the world? I mean, people have been trying now for 50 years, but if they ever succeeded, would that move the center of gravity away from here? Would we stop being the high-tech capital of the world?
Why is New York and London the center of the financial community? I don't want to work this is the penultimate place to work if you're in high tech. I mean, I don't want to work in Austin. I don't want to work in Miami. I don't want to work there, because the best and the brightest people are right here. If I was in investment banking, I'd want to live in New York. That's why this works. People want, as I said earlier, people want what we do.
All right, let's keep going from that. Not just the opportunity, but there's always been this other ingredient in the secret sauce, which we all talk about, but we don't take that seriously. How important is the weather? I mean, we know the valley was largely begun by GIs coming back from the Pacific on their way out through San Francisco, drinking and whoring and getting on the ships, ships out in the Pacific. They looked down and they said, what a gorgeous place. If I survive, I'm going to come back and move here, get my GI Bill, and become an aeronautics engineer. That's kind of what started this place. The weather really hasn't changed in all that time. How important is that?
So the one piece of criticism from some early book reviews came from Publishers Weekly, and it said something, again, I'm paraphrasing here. Unfortunately, the book was overly ambitious because she covers the lifestyle and talks about meeting places, and I thought, typical East Coaster. I mean, just devoid of anything beyond just that work mentality. And again, there's a lot to be said that sunshine creates vitamin D, which is related, there's a direct correlation to productivity. And I think, when you're always feeling, for the most part, sunny and happy, you can be a lot more productive.
Okay, so if the weather was Syracuse, New York, how many of you would still be in Silicon Valley? Hands? Oh, there you go. We may have found the most important ingredient right there.
Yeah.
The thing is, we have such a virtuous cycle going now here with the technology. It's all based on informatics that is powering all these things. Everything we've talked about, take it over into bio, take it into nano, et cetera. The weather is a nice ingredient, but not many people are being attracted here because of the weather, being attracted because of the jobs, except one class of people. Attracting those kids to come to Stanford and Berkeley instead of Harvard and Princeton. The best engineers, they want to come here. One fabulous school, great weather, and by the way, it's Silicon Valley.
Well, let's talk about education real quick. We have this remarkable educational system here where we have these tiers. We have Cal and Stanford, and then we have Santa Clara, USF, UC Santa Cruz, and then we have the CSUs, Then we have the community colleges by the dozens, and then we have scores of trade schools. How important is that? I don't know of any other place that has that kind of complexity and richness of education. Is that a defining factor, do you think?
You know, when we first moved here, people will say, well, don't you want your kids to go to Stanford? And they were just toddlers at that point. We're like, no, we want them to go back to East Coast schools. They've got to know what it's like to tough it out there. And you know, now that we've been out here, unquestionably, I spent a lot of time at SEQ, the Science and Engineering Quad, and also the D School and the Business School for the research for this book. There's no comparison. But the other thing is, which is one of my last chapters, is the competitive advantage being in Silicon Valley and growing up in Silicon Valley. And part of it is just the exposure, and I tell the story about Heidi Roizen, who did not grow up as a financially wealthy individual, but quite the opposite. But that mere exposure to just being around the Valley is critical. But with Stanford, since we live close to Stanford, the opportunities that it offers children are remarkable. I mean, my kids not only went to nursery school on the campus of Stanford, took a math class in the math building, gymnastics, played on the tennis courts. I mean, the schools, I can't explain it, but there's that demarcation elsewhere where higher ed is for higher ed. There's not this reaching out into the next generation and giving kids an opportunity to have that exposure.
Okay, why don't we start taking questions? While we're doing that, give me one more secret real quick while the microphones get to these people.
It's the best
Out of
place
your
on
book called
earth.
The Secrets of Silicon Valley.
Sorry, can I take issue with one thing? I think it actually is the diversity of schools and education opportunities that are in this valley that actually make it go. If you go back to the East Coast, you will be the first thing, the second thing, what do you do? Then where do you live? And what school did you go to?
Yeah.
Right? As it, I mean, it's as bad as the UK, and that's bad, okay, for anybody who's ever lived in the UK. Right? So what we have here, yeah, we have Stanford, we have Berkeley, but we have San Jose State, and we've got Santa Clara, and we've got San Francisco State, and we've got CSM, where Craig Venter went, who sequenced the human genome. Okay? So this idea that everybody has to go to Stanford or Berkeley to be successful is rubbish. And there is a vast, almost egalitarian way of people that fill every single job within this valley and then some. And this valley actually creates an ecosystem where everybody who finds his own level can find a job.
Questions? Hi there. Hi, Rob Fernandez, Wells Fargo Technology. Thank you very much. Looking forward to reading the book, Deborah.
Thank you.
Also a apricot and a cherry guy from Sunnyvale. Grew up in the valley during the 50s.
Mariani's for the apricots?
Mariani's right down the street
You
from
got the scars on
Mariani's.
your hand?
C.J. Olson for the cherries. Okay. So, thinking about secret sauce, I kind of go back to those days, and as you mentioned, the technology innovation was really subsidized and driven here by Department of Defense, of course, within the universities and the corporations here, because we were fighting a Cold War. But there eventually, I don't think there was a den or a garage in Sunnyvale where there wasn't a father and son soldering stuff or learning BASIC or Pascal. It was just what happened here. And eventually there was some successes, and these business people and technologists began to recycle what their experiences were. Eventually there were professional investors, financial institutions, supply chain, all began to develop a process to foster innovation, launch it, and help it achieve some ultimate success. And it's very profound, and for decades I've seen people come here from other countries and take pictures and go home and say, yeah, I think we can recreate this in another part of the world. But, as Bill's pointing out, the cooperation and the synergies we've developed here over these decades is extraordinarily profound and organically developed, hard to deconstruct genetically. So I'll just posit that potentially the secret sauce of Silicon Valley is a unique historical phenomenon.
I'd forgotten about the garages, the dads in the garages. Part of my childhood was in Mountain View, and most of it was in Sunnyvale. And the period in Mountain View, Steve Jobs and I were neighbors. And there was a guy that lived 2 doors down from him that was always out in the garage doing electronics. And I think we all had those guys in the neighborhood. Most of them worked for Lockheed or NASA. And I think we learned two things from them. One of them was the love of technology, and the other one was after the big 1970 massive layoff at Lockheed that put one dad on every block in Sunnyvale out of work. I think we all swore we would never ever work for a big government, contractor.
Yeah.
That we were gonna protect ourselves and be more independent.
I grew up across the street from Steve Wozniak, and they burned their circuit boards in our garage in Sunnyvale. And it was these dropouts that really formed all this, right?
Yeah.
So there's
on
a lot
Wright
of
Avenue.
universities being funded, but it was guys that were just...
On Wright Avenue, you watched them build the locker shockers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dave Anderson, Clear Edge Power, and a whole bunch of other companies over a long period of time. We just did something really interesting. I'm working with a startup in Oregon on fuel cells, and we just acquired a division of United Technologies that was roughly 10x our size. And hey, I get it. We've got kind of a nexus of knowledge and people seeing what's going to happen here that doesn't exist somewhere else. But the big difference that I'm seeing is structure. There's so much less social structure, frankly, so much less work structure here. People are allowed to do things personally on their own as very loose teams, whereas now UTC is probably a caricature of that on the other side, but the manager says what you're going to do. Everything is controlled and directed from the top. It's very predictable, and it's very slow. If you'd had that same team doing what we've done, they would have brought it in on schedule, but the schedule would have been 1.5 years later. I think that's what's happening here. You've all said, hey, you can do stuff and survive because there isn't a social structure. Frankly, that goes right down to the bottom. Work structure is so much looser. By the way, I wish Marissa luck when she wants to turn it off. Because I agree, she had to bring them back in. But look, the only reason the infrastructure around here works is not everybody has to go to work every day. If they did, we'd be toast.
Any comments? You guys talk about nexus in Silicon Valley. There's an interesting social nexus. Next time you drive down 85 and you go over the Fremont Avenue exit, look down at that lonely, empty, ice plant-filled intersection. I wrote about this. I discovered this years ago. I live in a historic house right around the corner from it. That at that intersection on particular afternoons in about 1967-68, you would have seen Steve Wozniak riding his bike home from Cherry Chase Swim Club. You would have seen Ted Hoff coming home from Intel, and he lived at that corner. And you would have seen Bob Noyce tearing along in his Mercedes about 85 miles an hour, heading up towards his house by the Los Altos Country Club. So what you had at those moments, these convergences, was the inventor of the integrated circuit, the designer of the microprocessor, and the builder of the first personal computer, all converging on one lonely little suburban intersection in Sunnyvale. That's, I think, is also part of the secret sauce of Silicon Valley. You'd have to go back to Dublin in the 1890s with Bernard Shaw and Oscar Wilde and James Joyce to have that kind of a convergence. I think that's what
And
makes it
hanging
special
out
too.
at Dinah's Shack, right? Dinah's
Oh,
as
yeah.
well.
Yeah.
You know, I did so much research on it and it didn't make it into the book, but I was just fascinated. I was trying to kind of unearth those
Oh,
stories.
you missed the
of-
wagon wheel.
Oh, well, I wrote about it. It just didn't make it in the final version. But, you know, just those stories of just everybody converging after work and just that was the hangout and, you know, the place where people discussed what they were doing.
Anybody here ever had a drink at the wagon wheel while it was in existence?
Yeah.
Good for you guys. Anybody buy one of those booths when they tore it down? You could put a wagon wheel booth in your house. Okay, next question.
Okay. So things really don't change. I actually started a software company. We didn't have garages in Ann Arbor. We had basements. Started a software company, 3 of us, 1,000 each. The basement of Masonic Temple, $3,000 sold it for $4 million to 3M. So things don't change much. But what has changed and what bothers me is I was in the first Genentech clinical partnership when California actually valued all of us. You may not remember, but there was a tax holiday for 5 years, from 1982 to 1986. This changed the world with genetic engineering. I was in the first Genentech clinical partnership, and the reason they sold it was that we had a 5-year tax holiday. And they told us that it was successful by Western Union Telegraph. I thought it was interesting. So right now with the tax situation, and our taxes went up 30% last year from 10.3 to 13.3.
I was going to say, what are the odds of us having a tax holiday again in our
Yeah,
lifetimes?
we go the opposite way, but I go to Asia a lot. Every Asian country that I talk to, 15, 16, 17% flat tax for corporations and for people, and I talk to more Asian startups. That bothers me that we're going the opposite direction. Is anyone worried about California and prohibitive taxes?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, again, my background's in economics and in education, but it fascinates me how Silicon Valley does thrive in the worst state to do business. It's just a fascinating case study.
Well, it kind of shows you what value the government adds, doesn't it?
Sandy, you took a company public. Would you take a company public now with
Yes.
Sarbanes and options expensing and all the regulations? And
Well, first of all, there's a new law where you can take a company public with, you don't have to worry about Sarbanes-Oxley until you're $1 billion in revenue. And with the financial model of a cloud company being, you don't hit $1 billion in quite a while. I mean, here is Workday, whose revenues are $200 million, and they have a $10.6 billion market value. So, that's a real advantage. I think there's not that many companies who've taken advantage of it. Actually, Workday did take advantage of the new laws. And you don't have to have 3 years of financials. So you really, are going to have a little bit longer time to breathe before you have a SOX compliance issue. So the answer is yes.
okay, any questions?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Ray Sika with Sensitel. We are a startup. My question was, in this decade, one thing which is different is that because of financial crisis, the major companies have a lot more cash. So HP is there, Cisco has $46 billion. They may not invent the cloud technology, but they can obviously come in at any time. Same thing with big data. So what will be the impact going forward in this decade? Because you have these people sitting with tons and tons of cash.
Anybody?
Well, I think first they're going to have to figure out how to survive these disruptions we talked about. So I definitely think we're going to see a continued acquisition kind of a situation. From '84 to 2000, 80% of successful monetizations for venture capital companies in this valley was IPOs. In the last decade, it was less than 20%. So it's mostly acquisitions. But that all has to do with, do they have the imagination? I mean, having a lot of cash, you can squander it pretty quickly. Look what HP did in the last 7 or 8 years. So
Yeah,
they're
I thi-
also going
I-
to be forced to pay dividends. And
I think history shows that companies that are sitting on large caches of money usually piss it all away. The race goes to the creative, innovative company, not to the one that's rich. There's been a lot of rich companies in this town whose names we've forgotten.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I think HP is a really, really good example. I think Dell is another one. You've got kind of the carrion birds of creative destruction, as we call them, circling Dell right now, the Blackstones and the Silver Lakes and people like that, and those people are necessary. And part of what they're interested in is the cash that's in the company. Poor Michael Dell saying, gee, will I have a job? That's the latest negotiation. The guy that founded the company, right? And Dell famously said, Michael Dell famously said, and I bet he regrets this to this very day, when asked, this is about 6-7 years ago, when asked about how he does R&D, and he said, well, I outsource my R&D to Hewlett Packard. Yeah. And it shows. So you can have lots of money and not spend it in the innovation that Bill and Sandy are talking about, and this is what you get. Well, I'm a little partial because I was there for 7 years. Apple's got an awful lot of cash. They're going to have to figure out what to do with it. They are the leaders in every single category that they have participated in, and their R&D spend is not to be trifled with. So I think they're using it. A lot of the people that have tremendous amounts of cash are sitting on that cash as if somehow that's going to make up for catching up. And that's where, you know, companies like Bill and Sandy's company, that's the opening that Bill and Sandy's companies both need.
I'm going to disagree. When Jobs died, I wrote, I think it was in Forbes, I said, no, it was the Wall Street Journal. I said, Apple is going to become more profitable for the next couple years because you've taken out the irritant, the force that caused all the chaos in the company. But after a couple years, short the stock because Apple will never be as innovative again. I'm not sure we'll ever see another. Steve Jobs did something amazing. In 10 years' time, he created 3 major industry categories. No one's ever done that. I don't think we'll ever see a category-created product again out of Apple. That's just my gut.
Steve is the ultimate example of when you have creative destruction destroying your market value, you have to reinvent your products in your product categories more and more rapidly. And the vision, I say it starts from the top, vision, value, and values. A vision to capitalize on a disruption in a way that creates value, new value to customers and based on a set of values that people are willing to buy from you. But it's that vision at the top. If you don't have that vision at the top, figuring out how to eat your own children, which is what we're talking about, how to destroy your own product set by building the one that replaces it, doesn't happen. That's why lots of companies can be really big and then just sort of lose it and either be bought up or go away. And we see that in this valley all the time. You know.
By the way, there was a famous press conference years ago. Fred Wang, the company was in trouble, and Fred was sitting there, and the press said, you know, are you guys going to make it? And his reply was, we're a billion-dollar company. Billion-dollar companies don't disappear overnight, which, of course, they did. A sidebar to that was standing next to him was a junior executive at Wang, John Chambers. And if you want to know what haunts him every single day, is the fear that that's going to happen to Cisco.
You know, I don't want to digress the conversation, but I do write about innovation and the need for IP, intellectual property reform. And in fact, I have a piece coming out in the Wall Street Journal this week on this. But the cost of innovation is becoming prohibitive for so many companies. And so we try to quantify the numbers this week, but you look at these cases that now Apple and Microsoft and these bigger innovators, Google, are dealing with. And it's, you know, tens of millions of dollars that otherwise could have gone into R&D. They're now fighting these patent trolls. And of course, you know, Apple patents everything for their own protection there. But, you know, it is escalating. It's a problem that didn't exist 10 years ago. And it is going to be increasingly more difficult to innovate without a lot of cash.
Well, you know, yes, if you're talking about trying to do disruptive innovation internally, inside your own company. The real key is figuring out where the disruptive innovation is going to happen in your marketplace or in adjacent markets, and then figuring out how to capitalize on it. The thing the United States done since World War II that is a massive engine is figuring out how to learn and create new science and then create that innovation. And it's not done in labs and it's not done by the government. It's done by the government funding basic research and building. We have the research universities in this country, and they compete with one another all the time for funds and for everything else. And out of that, we're creating lots of science. Then what's really funding the innovation is the next level. All this horrible failures we talk about that are coming out of venture and angel and everything else. And there's thousands and thousands of them, and only a few will rise to the top. And that's how you need to figure it out. when we started BEA as a transaction processing company with the idea that it would be a distributed operating system. He was part of the, him and Geoffrey were part of our brain trust that helped us figure this out. We built in 3 years from 0 to $250 million in business based on this distributed transaction stuff. While we let the market figure out how to invent what turned out to be Java, then we bought the leading company. Our stock price was cut in half in one day because we paid $160 million for a company with $1 million in sales, and we did $140 million in sales on that company in the next year, and $1 billion 3 years later. So, you know, the innovation's happening everywhere. It's having the vision to figure out how you can capitalize on it with the strengths of your in your core competencies.
Well, Mike.
More quick. Bill, you have a microphone? The tallest guy in the room. Hey, there you are.
Thank you, thank you. Bill Reichert with Garage Technology Ventures. Comment and a question. The brief comment is, secret sauce of Silicon Valley. You guys have touched on it a few times. It used to be it was just orchards, and now it's just innovation. And the problem that every other metropolitan area on the planet has is there's already an indigenous, culture of some sort. The only business of Silicon Valley is innovation.
It's technology.
And that's, sort of fundamental to the organization. But the question Bill started at one point, he said, he was talking about incubators and all these incubators, and he was saying, and they're teaching the wrong lessons. You were about to say the wrong lessons that our entrepreneurs are learning today. And so I wanted him to finish the sentence. What are the wrong lessons entrepreneurs are learning, and what are the right lessons they should be learning?
I was too flippant. There's a bimodal thing going on. They're very good for the networking and the trying to teach these people discipline. But the teaching, they're not teaching them how to team and partner and work with the next level sources of money. We find a lot of the folks that come out of these incubators, they have these ideas of the value of their organization and the values that they're bringing that are way beyond, and they're not. And it's not true for all incubators, but I actually think the incubators serve a really, really good purpose. But I think with my venture capital hat on, we've had not as much good success with folks coming out of incubators because they have a really impractical view of the value of what they have at the point where they come out of the incubator.
Is it because the pain threshold's is set too low? I mean, when you can't make your mortgage payment and your kid needs braces and you're in a startup, it tends to focus the mind. And when you're in a playpen, and you're doing drills and case studies, and you're getting paid.
Yeah.
It's just not as bloody and down to earth.
That could be part of it. I think part of it is you always want to get a great valuation. Oh, what we've done, we built this product, it's got to be worth $20 million pre-market, and we'll take your $5 million and we'll give you 20% of the company. Well, the problem with overpricing yourself to begin with is you'll never get another round unless you're really, really, really lucky. You need to take a smaller amount of money at more dilution to actually build the value. So you can find less smart money sometimes that'll really overvalue you. And then when it comes time for the B round, all the smart money's going to look at it and say, okay, we're going to take a really down round now.
We don't like to do that.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
You want to say something? 2 more questions? Then we're done. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Carol Blanchard, and I was born and raised at the Loveland Instrument Division, and I want to say something about Hewlett-Packard. When I came out of school, I went to HP. My husband went to HP. Our son grew up and went to HP. They invested in me. I had years of management training and growth, and I went out of HP to a great career, and I'll bet there's a lot of HP alumni here. So I'm thinking, and what I wanted to ask you is about the investment they made in the people they had, how much that has fueled the success of this valley and companies like them. And do you think we're making that kind of investment today?
Short answer, no. By the way, I love Hewlett Packard. We got started with Hewlett Packard. They were our very first client. So, this is back when we, Jeff and I and another guy were toying around, with this as a way of avoiding real employment. So, HP was our starting block. And I can truthfully say that back then, and really up until, 6, 7 years ago or so, there was that kind of investment being made within the company. Companies get to a point where they get too large. They, as Bill was alluding to, they ignore the dynamics of their category. They ignore the dynamics of their market. And they start into this mentality whereby it's all about what we think. It's all about what we see. Apple went through this in the 90s before Steve came back, right? It's all about making presentations to ourselves and thinking about that we're doing something out in the marketplace, that the marketplace cares. That's what actually led them astray. So when that happens, then all the rest of it, at least in my experience, goes away. Because it's all about keeping the focus on what we're doing is correct and we will not look at other things.
I think it's really too bad that the companies are not doing more training. I think that Hewlett Packard was amazing at doing the training. I know Xerox trained salesmen. We used to hire them right after they spent a year outside of that. IBM, so many of the companies train people, and they were just much better suited to their profession. I think things are happening so fast in the Valley that you don't have the time or the money to train people. You have to put it in other resources, and I think that's a failure of the Valley, quite honestly. And that's and also I think because things are happening so fast, you don't have the time to make mistakes. I mean, you said the failures. I mean, I sort of say learn from your mistakes before you fail. And I think we used to have more time to try things and see if it worked, and then try them again before you really before you hit a wall. I know within Kenandy, when we started, we thought we were going to be selling to small companies, and we tried selling to small companies. I didn't overhire, even though I had a nice pile of venture capital money, and we started selling to small companies, and that was fine. We sold 15 systems right away, but the small companies were very difficult to deal with because they didn't have that type of skilled users. And then we went to little bigger companies, and then now we're only selling to large companies because the large companies have the money to put into training people to be able to implement the systems that we sell. So I think it's too bad that training is not a major focus of most companies in the Valley right now.
A classic HP story involving two people up here on the dais. I'm a 23-year-old PR guy, junior PR guy in corporate PR at HP, and the head of PR comes over to my office, my desk, and says, I just got a call from the Computer Systems Group, and was it Ed McCracken?
Ed McCracken.
Ed McCracken says,
or
asked
Paul Ely.
if you could drive down to Mountain View and meet this woman who's got this new startup and help her with PR. And I went over there, and it was 2 rooms, and you were unloading boxes.
Yeah, I couldn't afford a garage, so we started the second bedroom in my apartment.
Yeah, and I mean, this was what HP would do in the Valley. I mean, it not only trained people and pollinated the Valley, but it also had this remarkable support network that kind of arose out of the HP way of helping new enterprises become successful.
Not only helping, but they were highly ethical. I mean, there were 2 companies that were leaders in the computer industry besides IBM. There was Digital Equipment, and there was Hewlett Packard. And we had the fortune of working with Hewlett Packard, and we knew that they would never screw us, excuse my language, but it was just a very highly ethical company, and they really looked out for their vendors, they really looked out for their customers and their suppliers, and the HP way was the HP way. That was the way it was. And I think that was very important to the building of the Valley. I think every company for many years tried to emulate HP. HP had donuts for breakfast. We had to go out and make sure that our employees had donuts and coffee. I mean, HP didn't lay off people for many, many years. They would put people on 4-day a week so that they didn't have to lay off people. I mean, the HP way was what every company in the Valley wanted to emulate. So I think that it's really important, and I hope that HP gets back on track.
Folks, we've run out of time, I'm afraid. I want to thank our panelists, Bill Coleman, Sandra Kurtzig, Deborah Perry Piscione, and Paul Wiefels. Thank you all too for being here. It was marvelous. Great question.
Thank you all so much for sharing your perspectives so candidly. We really appreciate it. In my humble opinion, what happens in rooms like this tonight is part of Silicon Valley's secret sauce. Debra has graciously agreed to stick around and sign books for a short while. So if you haven't had an opportunity to approach her and ask for that, she'll be here. And you have been a wonderful audience. Thank you so much. See you next time.